Welcome to the program. I'm Okpeyemi Owoshini. We start off with business news. Nigeria and South Africa have signed a memorandum of understanding to boost cooperation in the mining sector. The agreement was reached during a bilateral meeting between the Minister of Solid Minerals Development, Dele Alake, and South Africa's Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Eldin Abuja, Gwede Mantashe. The MOU, which outlines key areas of collaboration along with implementation timelines, is part of efforts to solidify the partnership established through the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission, inaugurated by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission have vowed to hunt down operators of Ponzi schemes across Nigeria. The Nigerian government agencies declared this following the collapse of digital asset platform CBEX. The SEC, however, revealed that it had yet to receive formal complaint about the collapsed digital asset platform. All the EFCC said individuals who invested in the CBEX digital trading platforms will get their money back. CBEX, which claims to use artificial intelligence for trading in cryptocurrency and promised 100% returns in 30 days, collapsed on Monday with an estimated 1.3 trillion naira lost. Now, reacting to this, financial analyst Feyi Fawemi says regulations will not stop Nigerians from patronizing Ponzi schemes. According to him, Nigerians will continue to fall victim due to the economic situation in the country.
There are many factors at play here, and one of them is the way people can form communities, which are sort of black holes, and those communities are not visible to anybody until something bad happens. So people can gather on the internet of like-minded people, and sometimes, like-minded people, they can go wrong in the sense that everybody in the group thinks the same way. Right. So there's this Yoruba saying that, everyone is sleeping and facing the same direction. And I think that's kind of like what happens here, whereby you have communities form of like-minded people who are all thinking the same way, who are all looking for the same thing. And there is really nobody in those groups that is able to say, hang on a minute, there's something wrong in here. And obviously, we have regulatory problems in the sense that our regulators are very reactive. They don't seem to think of being proactive and prevention as part of their job. So it's a multitude of factors. Obviously, people want to make money quickly. Everything else seems hard. And when an easy opportunity comes up, people jump on it. Sometimes people even know that these things are dangerous, but they want to go into it because they think that if I get in early, I might be able to get out early and I won't be one of the victims. But in the end, they never tell you when a Ponzi scheme is going to end. So I think one thing we always have to realize about regulation is that regulation is for people who are going to keep to the law, right? So if you and I, for example, and the government says don't kill people or something, it is really for people who are not going to, but people who are criminals or who are fraudsters, the regulation does not matter to them. It doesn't matter. A fraudster is not going to say, okay, the law has changed. Maybe I shouldn't do this fraud anymore. Rather, what they will find is another way to get around even the new regulations. So the people who are going to break the law, who are going to be fraudsters, are going to continue. The regulation is not going to stop them. So that's the first thing. I think what the regulator needs to do, regardless of what the latest law or what the latest thing is, to be a bit more proactive. Now, CBEX has blown up. People have lost money. All the regulators and the police, everyone is coming out and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I mean, some of these things can be prevented. CBEX, it happened openly. People were talking about it on Twitter, and everyone knew that, look, this thing looks dangerous, but the regulator never said anything. So now that it has blown up, the regulator is now showing up. That going forward, there will be another one tomorrow. I mean, there's a whole long list of Ponzi schemes that have happened in Nigeria. We need a regulator who can kind of have a forward-looking view, can be proactive. Regulators can be monitoring social media. They can have they can develop tools to monitor social media. When they start seeing something, is gaining some kind of traction, that is the time to step in and say, start warning people like, look, there's something going on here, or investigate. What is the use now when the regulator comes out after everyone has lost their money, people have destroyed buildings and all of that? I mean, the next fraudster, the next Ponzi scheme is not going to say, oh, Nigeria has a new Investment Securities Act 2025. Maybe I'm not going to launch this Ponzi scheme anymore because of this new act. That's not going to happen. That's just not how things work. So unless if the regulator really wants to be useful in this conversation and wants to be helpful, they have to develop tools to be proactive, monitor things. These things are being talked about on social media. You are hearing about them. People heard about all this stuff. People heard about this thing. They were talking about it openly. Obviously it has blown up now because the scheme has ended. But no matter what the law is, no matter what the regulation is, the regulator needs to be on the front foot and be a bit more proactive.
We'll take a short break here and be back with company news. Welcome back. The CEO of United Bank for Africa, Olivia Halawuba, has appealed to the Nigerian government to grant tax incentives and breaks to financial institutions investing in infrastructure and mining. This call was made during the 36th seminar of the Finance Correspondent Association of Nigeria in Abuja, where Halawuba emphasized the critical need for legislative support to drive economic transformation. Now, speaking at the event, he urged the government to introduce tax incentive for recapitalization-linked investment, which he described as a cornerstone for achieving Nigeria's ambitious goal of becoming a $1 trillion economy. He outlined the need for enabling legislation to facilitate long-term capital mobilization, strategic communication, capacity building, and robust engagement among stakeholders. And Access Holdings after-tax profit rose modestly to 642.2 billion naira for the full year ending December 31st, 2024, as banks continue to enjoy bumper profit from Nigeria's high interest rate. The group's after-tax profit marks a 3.69% year-on-year growth from the 619.3 billion naira posted in 2023. Also, the group posted an 18.9% year-on-year growth in its pre-tax, which is 867 billion naira from 729 billion naira. Now, a key component of the banking group's success was the 55.6% growth in its total assets to 41.4 trillion naira from 26.6 trillion naira at the start of 2024. We'll go on a short break here, but when Money Matters return, we'll be discussing the United States government under President Donald Trump announcing a 14% tariff on all Nigerian exports to the United States and its impact on African Growth and Opportunity Act. I'll bring you details after this break. Welcome back. The United States government under President Donald Trump has announced a 14% tariff on all Nigerian exports to the U.S., citing what it described as unfair trade practices and imbalances. Now, this new policy forms part of a broader trade realignment strategy aimed at protecting American industries and boosting domestic production. For Nigeria, however, this development raises serious concerns, especially around its long-standing trade relationship with the United States under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Now, since its inception in 2000, AGOA has allowed several African countries, including Nigeria, to export eligible goods to the U.S. duty-free. Nigeria, in particular, has benefited immensely, exporting over $277 billion worth of goods under the scheme. But it's important to also note that these exports have been overwhelmingly dominated by crude oil and petroleum products, while non-oil exports like agriculture, textiles, and manufactured goods have remained marginal. Now, this top-sided dependence have often been a point of criticism as it exposes the country to global oil shocks and limits the true potential of trade diversification. Now, with this 14% tariff coming into effect, alongside a baseline 10% tariff on all U.S. export, analysts worry about the ripple effect on AGOA benefit, investors' confidence, and the capacity of Nigerian businesses to compete in the global market. So what does this mean for Nigerian exporters? How will it impact trade relations with the United States? And is this also a wake-up call for the country to rethink its export strategy beyond oil? Now, to help us unpack these questions and more, we are joined by the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chinyere Almona. Thank you for joining me on the program, ma'am. Now, over 95% of Nigeria's AGOA export are crude oil. Now, with the United States now imposing a 14% tariff, how exposed do you think Nigeria economy is, and what does this mean for our trade balance?
So when I heard about the 14% tariff, I was quite concerned because of the trade balance and because of our export earnings from the US, particularly our crude oil. Over 95% of Nigeria's AGOA export to US is crude oil. However, much later, I understood that the oil and energy, excluding oil and gas, have been excluded from the 14% tariff. So if that is the case, that would mean that the implication isn't as significant as we thought it would have been at the beginning, because the marginal non-oil exports that will be affected by this isn't significant compared to if it was 100% of our exports. Having said that, I would say that over the years, we as Nigerians, we actually haven't fully utilized the AGOA, the Act, because the Act was supposed to be a developmental tool to help us enhance our non-export, non-oil exports, but we haven't utilized it as much. So if I look at it holistically, I would say that, there are, of course, there's a downturn because Nigeria cannot be competitive if there's a additional 14% tariff on the non-oil exports to the US. So, it poses its own concern, but not as significant as it would have been if everything had to be under that 14% tariff.
All right, but so you just mentioned that Nigeria has not fully utilized the AGOA Act. So how best do you think Nigeria can fully utilize it, bearing in mind that it ends in September 2025?
Well, so I believe that one of the reasons why we didn't quite utilize it may have been the issue of capacity building or awareness at the end of the day, because we at the Chamber, we made some effort to run workshops, and I think other institutions did workshops just to sensitize the market. However, compared to other African countries, we haven't utilized it as much as we should have. And some of the problem is that a lot of times our non-oil export, particularly in the agri sector, we tend to export raw produce, not processed produce. Therefore, if you export raw produce, the income from that export is of course minimal compared to if you had spent time processing it. And that was because we didn't have the infrastructure or the know-how to also process. So we have our own issues here, which means that we've talked about diversification for a long time, but we haven't taken very intentional steps to ensure that we diversify our economy, which is what the challenge is. Now, the AGOA is going to end this year. I believe we will, based on diplomatic relations, begin to have a conversation about a review, considering this 14% tariff that has just been, layered on us. But we should go into a conversation. We should have, trade discussions to see how we can review and renew the act for our benefit, so that we can begin to utilize it.
So non-oil exports like cocoa, sesame and cashew are just beginning to gain ground under the AGOA. Now, do you think this tariff could impact the growth of Nigeria's agro-export sector under AGOA?
Definitely, definitely. The product you talked about, cocoa, sesame, cashew, and you're right, they're just gaining ground because now we're just beginning to process some of it. In the last couple of years, we didn't do that sufficiently. So it would definitely affect our ability because it would mean that what we export will be less competitive in the global market. So yes, the impact is significant in that regard, but we should also look at it from another perspective that now we know that there's a risk and we should begin to develop our own industry and the infrastructure required for the agro industry to do well. And if we're able to do that, we may even find other export partners that we can, export our goods to once we get the things right. Today, if I look at where the agri sector is today, it's really untapped potential that we have because there isn't sufficient investment in agro processing. There isn't sufficient investment in cold chain logistics. There isn't sufficient investment in trade facilitation. Therefore, sometimes we lose the opportunity to increase our exports earnings.
That before now, Nigeria imposes a 27% tariff on U.S. export. Do you think this retaliatory move by the U.S. was expected, and do you think it was also preventable?
Well, so the Nigerian tariff, 27% is the highest. It's kind of high compared to other countries with the same relationship with the U.S. Do I think it's retaliatory? I wouldn't say. It may have been because over the years, I understand the U.S. trade representatives have always flagged Nigeria as, having high tariffs, having non-tariff barriers, having restricted market access. So it would be that they see the asymmetry as a problem. The fact that this seemed to be a one-sided deal. So that may be it. Or the AGOA itself was really just meant to be a one-way support for Nigerian African SMEs and help develop the industries. So it's neither here nor there. I mean, could they have been prevented? And that is the other question you asked. I believe that with timely, strategic, diplomatic conversations, we may have maybe preempted it. Okay, and today, when we go into a conversation today, let us begin to think, how do we begin to perhaps gradually reduce the tariff, or how do we proactively support U.S. companies as well, so that there will be a proper balance of trade.
All right, Master, I was going to come to that, but since you already mentioned it, so how exactly do you think we can maintain a balance with the United States?
Well, we can demonstrate goodwill by ensuring that we provide support for U.S. companies operating in Nigeria or wanting to do business with Nigeria, and U.S. export into Nigeria. One area where most companies, foreign companies who are exporting to Nigeria have problem would be around customs. Our ports isn't as efficient as it should be. So some transparency and efficiency around our port system would be very helpful. The other things around intellectual property protection, I think the U.S. is quite particular about that. So we may begin to demonstrate some support in that regard. But generally, ease of doing business. I think ease of doing business is not even just for the U.S., but the U.S. firms are also hit by the fact that it's difficult to do business because of our regulatory environment. So these are things that we can begin to put into a conversation that would demonstrate that we come in peace.
All right, so some African countries like Lesotho and Mauritius have diversified their AGOA exports beyond oil, unlike Nigeria. Now, why do you think Nigeria has struggled over time to do the same, despite its potentials in textiles and manufacturing as well?
So I think for those countries, and if I start to give you my ideas of why Nigeria may have struggled and won't live here today, but I think their success is largely attributed to strategic investment in export processing, which we haven't done. So they have invested more in export processing zones. They've invested more in efficient trade facilitation and consistent compliance with the U.S. trade standards. These are things that we have kind of gone into, but not intentionally and not enough, not sufficiently invested in. So we have struggled to diversify. And there are several structural challenges in doing business in Nigeria. We all know the issue of unreliable power supply, the manufacturing cost is so high, inadequate infrastructure. We just talked about port issues, so port congestion, limited access to finance. These are all things that prevent our small businesses from taking full advantage of AGOA like other countries have done.
Now, with AGOA expiring in September, like I mentioned earlier, what urgent reforms or support mechanisms do you think Nigeria should adopt to stay competitive and maximize the benefits before it ends? And also, seeing President Donald Trump introducing tariffs on Nigeria, do you think it will be renewed? Will there be a continuation?
Well, it's difficult to say whether it will be renewed or not. Like I said earlier, it's probably when we go into more diplomatic conversations, more trade negotiation, then we'll be able to determine. But the tariff by President Trump, it's kind of, a wake-up call for us. And one key priority is to support export readiness. By establishing it, we need to, in this period of time, support fully AGOA exporters and fund them as much as possible. They need to understand things like packaging rules and standardizations and certification. They need to do this very intentionally and very urgently to be able to take advantage of the window we have until AGOA is set to expire. But in addition to that, we need to get into that conversation that, that could keep it open for much longer. When improving trade infrastructure is another critical area, and we talked about ports, digitizing custom operations. These are things that we need to pay attention to, even as we go closer and closer to the end of AGOA.
All right, Ma, just before I let you go, what role do you think institutions like the LCCI can play in helping Nigerian exporters adapt to these new tariff realities and also push for more value-added exports?
So the Lagos Chamber of Commerce will play a crucial role in bridging the gap between the private sector and the policymakers. We help the private sector navigate the complexity of AGOA and other policies. And because we are an advocacy body as well, we then engage very actively to improve the business environment. Like I said, if you're able to get the business environment working well, and we can assure the ease of doing business, that means the cost of production will be lower and it will be easy for the private sector to engage appropriately. Be that as it may, I think we should also promote more made in Nigeria exhibition abroad to boost visibility and demand for locally produced goods. And so the Lagos International Trade Fair, which happens every November, is one avenue that we provide to showcase Nigerian products and made in Nigerian goods to the wider environment. However, having said that, over the years, we've also helped in terms of capacity building. We organize workshops to focus on compliance and packaging and value addition. These are things that will make Nigerian goods a bit more valuable, even when you export. And so the export earnings should be more. So the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry is quite committed to this cause because that's why we're here to support the business community to do business. And we really believe that if we can diversify our economy away from oil, we will be in a good place.
Well, the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chinyere Almona, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Well, that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Okpeyemi Owoshini. See you next time.